Hello everybody, this is Proxima Dust back with another video. This time I'm looking forward to showing you how to create an apartment in Cyberpunk 2077 basically from scratch. So not entirely, because you're going to be working with the vanilla apartment, V's normal apartment in the game, and kind of altering that, right? So it's not something as a completely new foundation, but as opposed to my last one where I was showing you just kind of how to tweak the builds I had made, now I'll give some insights into how to do your own build. So what you can see right now in front of you is the Corpo Netrunner build that I created recently and uploaded onto Nexus. And basically, you can see it's quite distinct. I mean, the essential shape and some of the structural work is still there from the vanilla apartment, but it's pretty unique overall. So you can do much the same thing. So I'm going to assume with this video that you have Appearance Menu Mod, AMM, and Cyber Engine Tweaks, CET, both installed already. You do need that in order to do any kind of building stuff or even run the apartments in the game. But just in case you don't, I'll just quickly show you this fellow's video, how to install Nexus mods to Cyberpunk. It does cover CET and AMM, and that's from PC Gaming Zone. They seem to do a pretty good job of that, so if you need help getting those installed, go ahead and check that out. Otherwise, we can just assume that you're good to go and jump in. So the first thing you're going to want to do is hit whatever key you use to open Cyber Engine Tweaks normally, and then you're going to look for your Appearance Menu Mod UI. So it might be collapsed like this. Just open it up, and then you're going to go to Decor, and then Presets, the Presets tab down here. As you can see, these are different. And then normally when you're in Presets, you click on the drop down. It shows all the apartment swaps you may have installed. I've got a whole bunch of the ones I've made there. But what you're going to want to do for a fresh install is click New Preset. And all that does is it creates a JSON file for you. That's what's going to store all the information for the apartment you make. And so in this case, it basically has cleared all the props from the preset that I had, the Netrunner one that was showing there. And it's just gone back to the basic apartment. Now I am using another mod, apartment renovation mod, I think is what it's called. And so basically I'm using the white, black, and gold standard for that one. So you can kind of see like some gold trim around there. So this is a little bit different, even like the floors from V's basic apartment. So you might have the basic apartment, or if you're using that Reno, something different from this. I definitely recommend checking it out. It's quite handy, and I'll just quickly, just to show you exactly which one I'm talking about. So V's apartment renovation. So fantastic mod. You can see in the pictures, you could change the essential structure colors. It'll change the couch colors and stuff like that as well. So this is the one this is the zebra variant. So it's instead of gold, it's got the stripes. So yeah, there's a lot to work with there. You can customize the fan. You can customize the color of the brain dance machine as well. So that's definitely worth looking at. All the ones I make, one of the first things I'll do is I'll pick the basic color scheme that I want for it, right? And then kind of build from the ground up with that. So yeah, check this out. It's a great mod. And any mods you use, don't forget to endorse. That's always really handy and helpful to the mod creators. So jumping back in, we've created this new one. It's just called My Preset by default. So we could rename that. You could call it whatever you want. Say I was building a new Corpo variant, I could call it Corpo, medic apartment or something like that, right? Not that I'm making that, just a heads up right now, but and then just save and boom, renamed. So everything's fine. Next step, it's generally recommended. Rex GTA had mentioned this, I think, a few times in his mod, that you place one prop in the world and save it, log out of the game, and then log back in. There's a bug that can happen, basically. There's actually two bugs, I think, that can happen with AMM, and apparently that can prevent one of them. I don't think I've ever had that bug myself. But essentially you would just kind of go drop one item, save it up. I've already done that. So what we'll do is jump into experimental apartment. So this is the one where I did that. This is the chair that I dropped down. So everything seems to be working fine. I am just going to remove that chair. So yeah, back to the vanilla apartment, and now basically, you know, that I'm on experimental apartment, any changes I make, anything I save or update or whatever is going to affect this file specifically, right? So looking around, the first thing I generally suggest you do is to get yourself, you know, familiar with what type of build you want to do, right? What's the concept you're working with? So I use the life paths from Cyberpunk to kind of guide me, right? So I said, well, I love the idea of, you know, Corpo, Street Kid, and Nomad. So I started off with kind of Corpo, which I tend to like because it's like kind of, you know, this cleaner and like more of like a beauty, you know, aesthetic that I wanted to pull out a bit with that one. And so basically just get an idea, I would recommend, of like what kind of colors and stuff like that you're going to be working with. So, you know, colors and textures and stuff like that, because they'll support the themes better. Like if I were to jump around a little bit here, you know, if we go into Netrunner, I went with a black base. So you can see the structural pieces that I used to clean up a lot of the walls to cover them up. It's all very dark, right? It's a dark build. I thought darkness would suit Corpo better. I also like black a lot because it's you know, black, white, and gray are kind of nicely neutral, so they can work with a lot of different colors, and colors can pop really well off of them, especially black. So black was my core, and then I went with blue and purple to accent it. And I generally try to stay in a framework of, you know, 2 to 3 colors like that. Obviously, you'll have some different colors that'll pop off of it, but that kind of comes later. I like to start with something fairly simple to make sure that there's good consistency of the build. If you have 5, 6, 7 colors kind of splashing around, I mean, depending on the concept of the build, that can work. But a lot of the times it can also get very, what we would say, like busy visually. There's just a lot to process, and you want people to kind of, you know, narrow in on, you know, key details and stuff like that right away. So basically, yeah, we went with blue, black, and then you can see like the purple kind of, you know, and slightly pinkish from the couch neon to accent that. And then if we go to tactical, you know, similarly, I've got that black base again. I used a lot of the same pieces for structural elements, but then with this one, I accented with red in particular, right? Which fits the vibe for me of kind of like, I wanted tactical to be a bit more of like a combat related one with like still the luxury of Corpo. So you can see like the weapons on the wall. I made a little med center back there. You know, we've got the support chair here, patching yourself up. So yeah, same kind of thing. And then I basically did that with all of my builds. You know, even if we were going down to Street Kid, you can see Glam's a little bit more outlandish than some of the other ones, but you know, there's kind of a bit of like a pink grounding, you know, that's going on with this one. I'm not using the right renovation files, so like that black couch is normally pink, you know, in the variant I do of it. So stuff like that. So once you've got that down, another important thing I would say for myself personally is just music. You really, you know, you want to get in the headspace of what you're building, you know. So if you can draw from media, if you could say, oh, you know, I really love Akira or something like that, you know, and I want something to bring out either the feel of that movie, how it makes me feel, or the aesthetic of that movie, you know, so you can look at artwork and stuff like that. For me, music is super, super important for keeping myself immersed in the build, because as the creator, I need to believe in it, right, before it's actually realized. So I tend to use, I've been building in games for a while now. I started with WildStar about, I don't know, like 5 years or something ago. And I always use OSTs for the most part, original soundtracks for movies and stuff like that. So what I ended up doing for the Netrunner build is I used Tron Legacy soundtrack, which is a really nice, funky, techno-y kind of like, you know, it's good ambient, basically, sound. And that really guided my sense of what, you know, the Netrunner build would feel like. And I think that showed through. You know, to me, there's a Tron quality here, right? You can see where I'm drawing inspiration from. And then when I did tactical, basically, because it was more like, again, black, red, a little bit harder, more violence, I kind of made a little playlist of like industrial tracks, basically, like metal and industrial, for a little bit more of like that rock vibe, but not too hard, you know. So different stuff like that. When I did the glam build, which is very kind of like, you know, spunky and fun and whatnot, I listened to the body heat radio station in Cyberpunk's base game, you know, because that's got kind of like EDM music and stuff like that that really made me vibe out to what I was creating, you know. So that's just kind of, you know, personal thing, but I really feel like there's a lot to be gained by listening to appropriate music while you're building in this kind of situation. So digging into the more important stuff, what I actually quickly wanted to show you. So once you've kind of placed that prop, saved it, logged in and out and got rid of it, is just in terms of the JSON file. So this is where everything's stored. So if you're on Steam, I'm not too sure how GOG would work with this, but basically right click, I go down to manage, browse local files. It's going to pop a folder. So this is my installation, right? That's the installation of Cyberpunk. So in order to get to the JSON file, I'm going to go into bin, x64, plugins, Cyber Engine tweaks, mods. And then this is where Appearance Minion mod is installed. So I'm going to jump in that folder and go to user decor. And so you can see these are all JSON files that have all my different apartments stored in them. So here's experimental apartment. This is the one I just created. It's only 1 kilobyte because it's, you know, very little in it basically. And that's just to give you a sense of what's inside. Whereas like the tactical apartment, the corpo one, you know, you can see all the data, all the saved stuff in there. And you might encounter a bug that's fairly common with AMM while you're building. And what it does is it corrupts the save file. And you can tell the bug's gone off normally because it'll be 1 kilobyte in size for the save. Like this one isn't corrupted because it's fresh, right? It's brand new. But if the bug happened to the tactical one, this would become 1 kilobyte. I could open it up and I could see there'd be like virtually nothing inside. And so if that bug ever hits you, I tend to alt tab and I can basically just, you could click one of your apartment files, copy it, and then paste it somewhere else as a backup. So I'll create backups maybe every half an hour just to kind of make sure. But you don't have to do that all the time. What you can do if you get hit by that bug is jump back in and go to backup and click that button backup. And then when you come back in here, there's a backup folder. So you can open that up and it'll basically create a copy of the file. So the interesting thing here is when the bug happens and corrupts their file and it turns it to 1 kilobyte, the backup function still works and it will produce a totally workable file basically. So I just look like, okay, you know, what's the time and date basically? 3:31 p.m. So here's a backup. So it's not actually using the name like experimental apartment, but this is the backup, 1 kilobyte. So yeah, if you get hit with that bug, just hit backup before you log out, come in here and you'll have that extra file. And then you can basically just pull it out and drop it in here, you know, and I think it should work at that point. So I just wanted to give a heads up on that one because it's you know, it's a nasty bug, the sense that it corrupts the save file, but it's very easy to deal with as long as you know how to respond, right? So some essentials following that, you know, we're just going to dig into it. And I'm not super good with like editing videos or anything. So this is just going to be one long take and hopefully I don't like mumble or screw things up too badly. So just kind of bear with me on that one. First thing I'm going to do, just to show you basically how the UI works, right? So again, we're going to be working with decor and tools for the most part. So I want to put an item in the world. Okay, so I come here, I'm on the spawn tab, and I've got all these categories to work with, right? So it's pretty obvious: furniture, vegetation, like plants, you know, decor is more small objects, same with small props, so your lighting, etc., right? So you click on any of these, and then it just shows all the different items that you can spawn. Now, not everything in this list right here that I have is going to be available to you unless you're using my prop shop archive that comes with my most recent corporal ones, especially because what I do is I extract a bunch of fresh props from the game and I basically create my own archive and then I can use those props. You can use them as well with that archive. But generally, I pass all the items that I pull out of the game, I pass them on to the creator of AMM so that he can upload them into AMM and make it usable for everyone in the long run. I just wanted to give a heads up on that. So yeah, these are all categories. And one thing I would say as a takeaway from this is you have a favorites category. And so whatever you spawn an item in, so any of these items I can just click on and spawn. So we'll just spawn in an apartment chair. We could see it appear in front of us right here, nice and easy. And this is the item name that I just spawned. So if I spawn a toilet, you can see a toilet appears right underneath it, right? So favorite, if I click this button and I save it, and then I go into favorites, I'd have to scroll down to the bottom, but you can see apartment chair, right? So now that's saved. And this is a real time saver because a lot of the time when you're doing a custom build, I will pick a couple of core items that I'll use for a lot of the structural work, basically. So when I'm covering walls and stuff like that. And so I want easy access to those core items, right? So favorites list is great for that. You can save them into the favorites and then you have a nice and easy access. So keep that in mind. And then I'm going to click to unfavorite. Okay, that's kind of weird. I've never seen that happen. So unfavorite's not working right now, but no big deal. We'll despawn it. Maybe it's just because it's the first one. We'll go back here. So yeah, that's the favorite list. And then once the item's placed in the world, it's not actually saved to your save file, to that JSON file yet. You have to click Save Props. So if you forget to do that, everything in this list under the Spawn tab, you know, if you were to log out, it would all be gone. None of it would save. So you really need to remember, always save your props. Now, one thing is, once you save the prop, okay, it's just quickly saving, creates a new tab, Saved Props. So this is everything that you have saved. It is a part of your build. It's in the JSON file, okay? So in order to, you know, manipulate this item, to move it around or whatever, I now have to go into Save Props. And if I had a whole bunch of items placed, right, there'd be like this huge list of items and then I'd have to go and find it. I could use the search box, but it can be a pain, basically, is what I'm saying. So that's why a lot of the time it's good to keep the items in the spawn category. Like, again, you can see here, because if you're still in the process of like moving them around, they're not in the right place, but it's like, okay, now I need to move this other one to offset it. You know, it's just much easier to quickly go in here and target these than it is to go into save to find the item that's buried, right? So I'll usually work like one area. So maybe I'm working this corner up and I might throw down, you know, 10, 20 items. Not too many, because if for some reason, you know, I crashed or something happened with my PC, you know, I'd lose all those items. So I don't want to have like 100 of them because then I lose everything. But I'll work with about 10, 20 items, make sure that I'm happy with their placement, and then I'll save props, basically, right? And I can still adjust them later, but it's just a little more efficient approach. And then you got your despawn button, which just basically is pretty straightforward, makes the item disappear. And then you've got target. And as you just saw, this is how you actually move the item, right? So once you've selected the item, it turns blue, right? This one's yellow, so you can see it's switching blue between them. And then there's a duplicate function. My understanding is that's currently not working. I think they were, I mean, it might have been fixed, so give it a test. I don't want to mess around too much right now. But basically, it's pretty much what it sounds. You know, if I had one chair out here and I hit duplicate, it just creates another exact type of that chair, you know, or item, whatever it is, in the same location. So that's really handy. Say you're doing a bar and you're trying to place a whole bunch of like glasses on the bar. You know, you can just duplicate, shift it a bit, duplicate, shift it a bit. And that can be way faster than, you know, trying to spawn in and move to the right place every item. One little trick I'll give for that right away, because, you know, if the duplicate's not working, but this also has different utility as well, is I can select the item, go to tools, select save position, and that basically saves all the parameters of the item. And then basically say I spawn another chair over here. I could target this new chair, and then restore position has now replaced the save function. And when I click it, that chair appears in the saved position place. So you can see if we despawn the old one, this new one is still sitting there. Sorry, the back one rather there. So it's a pretty handy trick. Definitely worth having. And I think that's pretty much it for like this tab. Pretty straightforward. So that's how you bring items into the world. And then once items are saved in the world, again, they come into the save props. So it's kind of the same thing. Basically, I can hit remove instead of despawn if I want to get rid of it. Right? Otherwise, I can target it if I want to move it, same as before. Click show on map. So if you have your mini map, I turn it off when I build, but if you have your mini map, that's intended to do is maybe show you a ping. So that's in case like if you're targeting an item, but you're not sure like where it is in the build, you might be able to find it that way. So that might be handy. But the really important one here is update prop. So once I've moved this around, you know, if I move it back here instead, if I don't hit update prop, it's not going to save that. All right, so that's a key feature. Always make sure, similarly to what I was saying in the spawn tab, to always save the prop if you want it to be committed to your build. You need to update props when you make changes to them to commit that to your build as well. So that's pretty much, I think, it for the core stuff under decor. And now I'll just quickly show you for movement, right? So you already saw a little bit. So once you've got your item targeted, right, whether it's in save props or spawn, doesn't matter. Come here. This is basically your key movement. So there are a few different ways you could do it. You can choose pick up the target. I don't really use this at all myself. It feels a little bit clunky to me, but basically you can pick it up and just walk it around like that. That's how most games do building, right? So it's kind of, you know, it's useful for sure if you just want to quickly get from point A to B. You don't want to have to manipulate it there, and then just drop target, you know, puts it back down. So that can be fairly handy sometimes, but what I find is once you get used to the coordinates that you're working with in the space, like I will basically type in and do numeric adjustments instead to move an item long distances. So that's all these numbers represent. So right now, if this number rather goes higher, the item will go up. And if it goes lower, it'll go down. So if I were to delete 65, see it goes down. If I were to add, you know, 2 representing 200 or 250, you can see it going up. So that's basically one way you can quickly move an item. You know, that's up down. Basically this one is, you know, forward backward. Oop. You can get caught on the items if they have collision, so careful with that. You can see it was dragging me around. So that's forward, backward, and then left, right. And then this is tilt rotation. So this is rotation to spin it around. And then tilt if we want to go tilting that way, forward, backward, or tilting left, right. All this stuff very handy. You know, these 3 here and this one, like, you know, are the core ones you're going to be using most often, most likely. But the cool thing too about these tilts is you can just, you know, double click in and delete. Just reset to 0. 0 is the default. So if you want to stabilize something back to its original place, just type in 0 there. 0 is the default for this as well, but I mean, that's kind of different in the way it faces. So yeah, so that's basically it. So you can see I was typing in numerics, right? So you can do a quick movement that way. Or if you click on one of them and it shows up purple and then you drag left and right, you can drag the item around that way. And this is the way that I do most of my stuff. You know, typically I'll like walk to where I want to spawn the item, say like right here, I'd spawn it in. And then I would like nudge it into place basically, right? So let's even just use this one. I'm gonna keep it into view. So basically I want to bring it up. Say I want to put a chair. You know, just kind of ease it in. Right there. And I want to turn it in a little bit. There we go. Right. So now I've got that in its own place. Now say I wanted this chair to go like on the other side of the room. You know, I could quickly do it that way. And looking at the number, you know, 74 to 66, right? So 66 is the coordinate when it's on the other side of the room. So once you get to know those coordinates, you know, it's not a big range of numbers within such a small space. I could just type this in and be like, you know, 66 instead. It's gone on the other side of the door. Yeah, there we go. So anyway, that's just the difference between click drag and you know, typing in numeric input for items. And then if you want to get rid of a saved item, you just hit the remove button here. Boom, that's gone. I think that pretty much covers everything for basic UI. You know, make good use of the search window if you're looking for anything. So I could type in bottle. Here's a whole bunch of different types of bottles, you know, chair. There's a ton of different chairs, even like TV, right? So any basic thing you can think of, you know, so there are beds, bed related stuff, right? So beach, sunbed, even all sorts of things, right? So you can really go digging with that. And then same thing, once an item is saved, you can quickly jump over to saved props and, you know, search again if you had a list, right? So if you're looking for one particular chair. So that's pretty much the core stuff there. And so just checking something quickly. Yeah, okay, so that's basically it. So going back to starting off on your build, definitely pick a theme. You know, I think you can experiment a bit, throw some items around, whatever you want, but I really suggest having a concept in mind and kind of getting yourself set up. So I just want to give some examples now for kind of like the basics. So this is something that a bunch of us in WildStar, when I used to build in that game, we called cobbling. Okay, so this is basically where you're just, you know, there's kind of, we would frame it as two different types of like building in games that you could do. There's like decorating. So that's when it's like, you know, Animal Crossing is probably a good example, I think, of that. I mean, there might be some cobbling in that game as well, but, you know, typically what you'd be doing is I want to place a table. You know, I want to place some objects on the table. I want to place a couch here maybe, or a chair, or whatever. So that's just like normal home decorating, right? But what you can also do, and it's really dark in here now, so I'm just going to throw a light down quickly just to give a little bit of visual. So say I don't like this structural piece, right? This whole window or whatever. You could do another thing, which we call cobbling, which is basically the great thing about building in this game right now is that there's no collision detection between props. Okay, so if I take two props and I put them out in the world, I can basically like meld them together and they won't like collide, so they're not prevented from doing so. Some games, I think, like if you build in Fallout 4 without using mods, there is like a degree of collision detection, so I don't think you can kind of like meld them in that way. But one really great kind of benefit that you can get from that, I could type in pillar here, so I can spawn in a concrete pillar, right? And so I can shift this over, and I can basically cover that completely. This is another really important one, actually, scales. So this is the size of the object. So you can see it's shrinking and increasing, right? So I can basically make this large enough to where it's covering that base thing, right? So I've just transformed a part of the wall. And that's cobbling because I'm intersecting objects. Like normally, you know, someone might think, oh, you know, you spawn the pillar into the world and it's just going to act as like a pillar out in here. But it's like, no, you can actually mesh those things together. So to give an example of doing that, what I actually ended up doing is, the fun thing about cobbling is it opens a lot of possibilities with decor. Every prop that you have is not just what it seems to be, but what you can make of it, especially since you have scaling and you can size stuff up in this game. So to give an example, I'm going to type in air conditioner, okay? And you probably wouldn't think it, but this was a key building piece for me when I made the Corpo stuff, because I did not have the black, sleek look I was going for from like the structural pieces available. So like the walls and floors and stuff like that. So what I did was I would go, okay, it actually looks pretty grayish right now. I think that's just from the light, but let's spawn in this one. And I really like the look of this object. You know, it's got some interesting details on it, and yet it's not so detailed that it can't work in a structural kind of context. Like that's kind of nice and flat or whatever. So what, I ended up doing is I pull this back. I'm actually just going to double click and use numeric input. I'm going to size it up to 400 and look at that. That's a nice big chunky piece. Come over here and I'm just going to slide that into place. Now you want to try to make sure everything's very like kind of even, right? You don't want a lot of weird kind of, curves and facings for things, because then you can end up in a place where it's just like, it just feels off. So just kind of keep things flush, right, is what we would describe it, right? So this is nice and flush right now. If I were to turn it, okay, that's not flush, right? So obviously that's going to eventually look bad, even if it didn't look bad already. So I just pull it up a little bit and voila, right there, I've managed to customize that whole back wall. Now it's just a nice chunky black wall, gets rid of all that detail that I didn't want in the build either. And yet if you get close, you can see, there's a little bit of like indenting there. So there's a little bit of kind of like detail going on. I could raise it up and I could center that square if I wanted to, right? That's kind of nice. So that square could now act as like a framing. I could put something in the middle of that, which I did something similar in my techie build. And so that's, that's just from that one air conditioner item, right? So maybe we could spawn in a different one, right? This is the exterior air conditioner. So, it's good once you find an item like that you're going to use to cobble with. And cobbling fundamentally means using it in an unintended way, right? So that's an air conditioner, Aerosock interior that I'm doing. So Aerosock exterior air conditioner is a different shape. You can see here. But it's the same texture and it's the same color, and that makes it complementary to the other piece that I just used. It's going to blend well with it. So if you can find groupings of stuff like that, like even like there's 3 rich air conditioners here, so they likely have similar texture and colors, right? And so you can use them in that kind of combination to complement each other really well. In this case, I actually did just that, and I just quickly sized this up. And what I ended up doing with the corpo ones, I'm going to drop this down a bit. I just slid it right over here. And I'm going to get it in the wall. Slide it down. I actually, I think I centered it off of this top piece that the Braindance machine is embedded in. So it's good to keep things kind of grounded like that. Yeah, so you can see it's kind of centered off of that. And then I just pull it forward. And if you've seen the corpo builds, that's what I used as like kind of to embed the TV in, right? So that's kind of like a new structural element that's going on there, right? And then you can see on the left and right, there's a bunch of like kind of garbagey stuff that's showing there. So what I could do, we saw with the interior air conditioner, is it was pretty flat. So I could tilt it up this way. 90 degree does actually work, right? Like, so 90, 180 degree, 270, those are like core numbers, right? So I'm going 90 degree with this, and that keeps it again like flush. I'm not sure what the word I'm looking for is to describe that, but to make sure that things are kind of like consistent, right? And aesthetically kind of pleasing in that sense. So I'm going to drop this back a bit. I'm going to blow it up pretty large because it's a pretty big back wall and I want to get full coverage. And I'm going to kind of drag it to it. So we can see it's standing out on the right, but not the left, right? So it's not flush. So we just kind of want to tilt it back a bit. Pull it forward, and there we go. Yeah, so slightly not flush still, so I just tilt it a little bit, and there you go. Now it's flush on both sides. Pull it out a little bit more, drag it over, so it's not quite big enough. I'm just gonna size it up a little bit more, and there you go. I can drag it up to cover that upper white area there. And so I've now just created a customized corner that has a nice black sleek texture to it. Okay. Now the one thing with cobbling like this that you have to keep in mind is I've increased the size of all these objects, right? And they're being pushed into walls. So they're going to pop out on the other side. Now it's super dark at nighttime. You can't see anything on the other side. That one I can tell you from experience is pretty much fine. But this is a big chunk, and the other one behind it is even bigger. And if we go in here, we can see, oh crap. right? So that item has pushed right into this room. It's really like, you know, destroying a lot of what's going on in here. So you might be able to work with that and cobble around it and like integrate it into this room. Like if you're okay with this room being substantially smaller, right? But if we don't want to work with that because it's like, that's not really working. We're basically going to just, what I'll actually do first is, so when you're saving positions, the old save is still there. So I'm going to clear save position. That gets rid of that. And I've got the interior air conditioner selected, the one here. So I'm going to save its position. And then I'm going to despawn it. Okay, so that disappears. And so what I want for this, if I don't want it invading that other side, I can't make something bulky work there very well. So what I can do is, let's say wall metal. Walls are reliably, you know, it's a basic structural thing, so they're reliably flat in that sense. So I could go wall metal big. And when you spawn it, the way you're facing will actually affect how it comes in. So say I was kind of like turned on an angle there, so it's spawned in on an angle. So to save a bit of time sometimes, what you can do, I can despawn that. Try to align it so it looks straight. If I look at the bottom of the screen, and then when I spawn this in, now it's pretty much straight. So, you know, it's just, you'll get used to it. You know, it'll speed things up a little bit, but for now, so spawned in, I'm going to send this to the back. You can see color-wise, I mean, it's dark right now, so this is actually a little more silver gray normally, but because it's so dark in here, it's actually blending really well with those two other pieces. So I'm going to size it up a little bit. And we're going to drag it back there like that. We can see it's not flush, right? Because there's white showing here, but not on this side. So we're just going to turn it a little bit. And it might still be crooked just because it's covering it. So what I'll typically do is just drop it back a bit, right? So now you can see it's actually not really flush on the other side. That fixed it just slightly. Boom. So that should be very straight right now is the main point. So there you go. I've got basically the same coverage as before. It's got a little more detail. You can see like in the center of it there, I think it's intended to be like a little glass kind of design. You can see in the center of there as well. And if I come in here, because it's a flat piece, it's not protruding through the other side. So it looks okay. So there we go. I've got a nice custom corner. And again, that's what we mean when we say cobbling. Now, for this situation, basically what I do in my builds is I don't really like having to I find it difficult to cover up a lot of what's been done with this like drop down corner area. And I don't really like, you know, I try to erase the fine details from the basic apartment because a lot of them won't fit. Like all this garbage here. I mean, yeah, that's totally great for like Street Kid, maybe for Nomad, but doesn't work for Corpo, right? And I like to have my own details placed. So what I tend to do is just cover the whole floor. So I could use a floor piece for this. But just to give a sense, again, I really like sticking to cobbling. Cobbling is key to creativity. It expands your options so much because if you have 1,000 props available to you and each of those props could be used in multiple different ways, well, now in reality, you have 4,000, you know, not props, but, you know, appearances, if you will, that you can work with. So this was one of the ones I used for Corpo as well. I used a basic normal floor for the bottom, and then I accented it with this. But what I'll show you for this one, so something you have to get used to, you can see the item I just spawned in, right? So it's a screen. If I come to the other side, it disappears. That's because there's no texture created for the other side. The devs never intended for that side of the prop to be visible. So you will see that from time to time. If you ever spawn something in and it's invisible, it's not showing on your screen. It's either that, in which case you want to target it and then rotate, right, until it's facing you. Sometimes, though, they might also be like too low or too high. So typically, if I don't see an item, I'll spawn it in by going like high or low to just make sure it's not invisible that way. And then I'll rotate. So for this one, what I want to do, okay, it's a little crooked. So I want to flush that way. That's not the one we want. So reset it to 0. And we want it this way. So again, 90-degree angles, right? 90, 180, super key stuff. So I'm going to tweak it just a bit so it looks like it'll be pretty steady. And then I'm going to drop it till it's just above the base ground. I don't want to go high above unless, you know, you could do that if you wanted to have an elevation in the room, but I don't want to like lose a bunch of ground stuff and a bunch of building space. So I just go like right there, right? And so what I could do is 600. You can see this is now quite large. So it's not quite big enough. Now I can keep sizing it up. Say I go 900, right? So, okay, it's covering to the back now, but you can see it's still not covering on the left completely. And it's not covering enough behind me, so I can drag it down a bit. So it's almost to the door. It's not quite big enough. If I were to go 1200, okay, that's pretty much covering on that side now as well. Actually, that's inside the bathroom, so I'm just going to, oops, bear with me here, wrong way. So there you go. So now it's kind of covering to both sides, but okay, actually that looks all right. So we could drag it back to there. It might be sticking out the front. Yeah, look, it's probably hard for you to tell. But basically you can kind of see the outline here, right? So it's sticking out of the building. Now, you know, depending how much it's sticking out, people may or may not see that if they're out in the world and they happen to look up at the building. So generally speaking, you know, I do stick stuff through in this building because I don't think there's a lot of like times in the game where people are going to be looking up at the mega building from this particular angle. But generally speaking, you don't want to have huge things sticking out like that, right? So what you could do with this instead of having it stick out that way is I could turn it, right? So the basic was at, you know, close to 0. So I'll turn it to a 90-degree angle. So it's pretty close to 90 there. So it still looks just a little bit crooked. Okay, so sometimes it has to go past 90 just to fit like the dimensions of the room or whatever. I could slide that down. We're going to want to drop it a little bit lower. Now it's not big enough that way. I can size it up even more. But anyway, suffice to say, the cool thing is on the other side of this wall is like a big chunk of nothing. So you can bury into this wall completely confidently that, you know, unless it's like really, really long, like nothing should stick out. Same with this wall. And then when you go in the armory, like you don't want things sticking in that's screwing up your armory, but like something like a floor, for example, if it was going through this wall, there's nothing really on that side as well. So just to show you quickly. So this is basically around where your apartment ends, probably where this line is. And you've got this space to bury in. So if you go too far, it'll pop out of this wall and then it'll look really terrible, right? So that's not great, but you've got a good amount of space. And then on this way, kind of the same thing. I think the armory probably ends about here. And so you can continue to go through. If you go too far, it will come out and stick into here. So that might look weird. Now, that said, there's no way into this that I've ever found. So even if that happened, if you really wanted to use the space for cobbling things and burying things back there, you could just spawn a wall in, like a concrete wall that kind of blends in fairly well, and just cover up the cage. And then it's not even visible. People can't see back there. There's a little bit of like, you know, depth to the apartment building, I guess, lost from that. But who's really walking around exploring, you know, after a single time, right? Like people are not likely to notice that. So if it makes the apartment that much better, then I say go for it. So keep that in mind. And as you're cobbling, this is another reason why I wanted to show you outside, you know, I would say make regular, you know, journeys outside your apartment to make sure that nothing you've placed has caused that kind of issue. Because what you don't want is to be like, you drop an item and you're like, oh, that looks perfect on that wall or whatever. And then like an hour later, you realize, oh crap, it's like sticking out of the wall right here. I've had that happen numerous times. And then, you know, the crappy part about that is you have to go and find that item and then either remove it and replace it with something else or tweak it, you know, maybe resize it or something. And that's just really annoying. So anytime you're cobbling into like exterior parts, just kind of take a peek on the other side and make sure that it's not doing anything super ugly. But yeah, so you can see I've got basically a custom floor, right? It's got a little bit of reflection on this glass, which is why I like it. It's dark and reflective, which I thought would work well for Corpo. But what I tend to do is like that. So I just eliminate that lower area And then I'll place a table on top of this crud to get rid of that because I don't want to see it. So here's a bar table. This isn't, yeah. So I think this is actually the one I used for Netrunner. So just pop that there, drop it right down. There we go. So it, you know, it's not quite covering all the garbage there. So I could place things around it maybe to hide those items, but what I'm just going to do with this is, you know, rescale it, size it up bigger. Why not? And if you find that, okay, now it's a bit like large, like it's sticking really high up in the air, you know, maybe you're not too happy about that, you can just sink it into the ground, right? And you can go quite low with it before you hit that garbage. So there you go. One thing about that, and I would say, like, keep this in mind when you're building in general, is it's when you're blending items like this, like, you know, this thing is now being pushed into this. Look at the base item and you can see that little lip at the bottom, right? So those are like kind of like those kind of transitionary visuals are really useful when you're cobbling, because something will look better when it has that. It's more immersive. It looks like it's meant to be that way. If I sink this one in, it's not too bad, but it would look better if it kind of had that little kind of thing, so it doesn't look like one object is literally just kind of melding into the other one, right? So this is where like shapes can become really important and you can do some fun stuff. So what I can do here, again, like keeping in mind all these bar tables are basically the same kind of like texture, just like different variations of it. So I could spawn this in. All right, if I want to get creative here, I could flip it to 180, which just, you know, turns it to the dead opposite. I could slide this up. You probably see where I'm going with this now. Size it up and drop it down. And boom. You know, maybe that's a little too big. I could like size it down a little bit. Could raise it up a little so it's a little bit thicker. And now I've created my own custom like transitional, you know, accent to that item so that it looks a little bit more like that's the original kind of table that's meant to be that way. And experimenting like this is really helpful because, you know, you can make things look unusual in that way and different from others, right? It's always kind of nice to be unique, right? To stand out a little bit. If you're using the same objects everyone else is using, this is for any, you know, environment design or any building that you do in games, you know. If you use the same items in the same way, your build is going to a degree look like other people's builds. But with this one table, by sizing it larger and sinking it so it looks lower, yeah, it still looks like that original table, which, you know, I think is from the Mox's Club, Lizzie's or whatever, but it's different, right? There's a variation. This particular permutation of it, you're not going to find, you know, in other people's builds or in the world, more than likely anyway, because I changed the size and the height, and then I added that little custom, you know, bottom piece to it. So now we've got a nice, you know, cute little custom table going on there. And another one actually I wanted to show just to display cobbling, because again, cobbling is so fun. Like there's so much you could do with it. You can get really creative. You need a lot of patience. You need to be willing to experiment. But there's a lot of rewards you can get from that. So one I used for my techie build to build a custom table for that. So I brought this. This is the type of thing that's really fun. Oops, that's not the one I want. Because it just kind of shows, you know, how much you can get away with cobbling. So look at this little desk lamp, right? We've got this little desk lamp here. And when I say, you know, every piece can be multiple pieces, you know, what I mean by that, looking at this item, is we've got the core here. So it's a glowing rod shaped thing. We've got the base, right? Which is kind of like a metal base. It's just to show here. So, you know, circular metal base. So like if I wanted to, I could have flipped this upside down and I could have used that as the base for that thing if I wanted metal instead of black, right? Just to show the usability of objects. And then we've got this top piece to it that's like almost like a greenish, right? And it's kind of less glowing, right? So to give again an idea, I could size this up to 600. I must have gone a lot bigger actually. So we'll go to 1,000. And I can sync that. And this is something I love about Cyberpunk, is for some reason the scaling, the items still look great. Like almost every item I've used, it retains the kind of, what's the word? resolution, like detail in that sense, you know, like it doesn't get like big and pixely and ugly looking. So you can really play with reshaping, resizing rather a lot in this. Actually, I think I went even bigger. So that's 16 and then sink into the ground. Right. And I've kind of got a custom kind of neat green looking table. I've gone fairly large with it. So actually it's starting to get a little pixely, like you could see kind of like more jagged edges or whatever, but not a big deal. But that's starting to be something. And so another item, and again, just to show you how crazy you can get, Lizzie's kitchen tray. And so this is nothing more than like, you know, typical bar tray, right? The drinks go on it and stuff, right? But it's got a lovely little curving shape going on. It's got roundness, right? So, you know, you want to kind of keep shapes in mind. So what I could do with this one, if I flip it, oh, look at that. It's got a nice blue neon strip that's going on it as well. So that's starting to look really funky. So I'm just going to make that 180 to make sure it's flush. You know, I could drag to size it. I'm going to just drop it. This in here. Dun, 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 dun. Look at that. Right? Don't want it to be too oversized in comparison. And now we have a custom glowing top for that. So that's starting to look pretty interesting. The one thing that's kind of weird is, you know, I didn't like, again, you can see at that size, it's a little bit more like jagged edges, right? Like it's like straight edge to straight edge. I don't really like that. Plus, again, you know, this item is just melding into that floor still, which we're not crazy about. But, you know, I do want a certain amount of consistency for this custom item I'm creating. I don't want it to be like 10 different, you know, colors and textures and stuff, right? You need it to blend. It needs to feel immersive and realistic in that sense. So what I'm going to do is keep targeting the Lizzie's tray. I'm going to come over here. I'm just going to round out the size. 400 is nice and clean and easy to remember. And I'm going to clear the save position. So the old thing I had stored, I'm going to hit save position on this one. I'm going to spawn another Lizzie's tray, target it, come over here, make it the exact same size at 400, restore position, which basically clones it, right? And then we've got the same one. And then all I'm going to do is set this back to 0. And look at that. Drop it down. I could keep that second glow in if I want, right? Which is pretty funky. But I kind of like having the glow just on the top because then it draws the eye. You know, that top part stands out. But now look at that. You know, the chunky line garbage is gone. We've got a cool looking glow in the inside. We've got a really cool looking reflection off of the screen floor. We've got this kind of smaller piece at the bottom as a kind of capping piece. So again, it doesn't look like it's just melding into this. And we've got a nice top. That actually, you know, looks pretty decent even from up here. I mean, again, it's really dark in here, but boom, you know, custom table number 2. You know, you're not going to see this anywhere else. And by the way, if you see like custom pieces like that in the builds that I do, I really don't mind if you know, make variants or even reproduce the same thing. You know, ideally don't like reproduce the whole same apartment and upload it or whatever, obviously. But I'm totally cool with people, you know, copying custom cobble designs and stuff like that. It's something I did a lot in WildStar, and the community there was really great about sharing that stuff. You know, you can obviously just figure it out yourself anyway, but feel free to do that stuff. So yeah, there's another example of custom cobbling. I'm just going to get rid of that to clean that up now. Just quickly have to check something. Yeah, so okay, something else I just wanted to mention quickly. Actually, I should have mentioned this a little earlier, but I've had a lot of feedback from people concerning Nibbles the cat and the memorabilia, which are basically like props that when you complete some quests in the game will appear in your apartment. So for example, in the armory, I think there's a certain quest you do. When you finish it, a ammo crate will appear right here. And so those memorabilia, like there's no control over that, right? So if the player completes that quest, that item's going to spawn. So that can create problems with clipping later. You know, if I had an object in that armory where that ammo crate shows up, those two objects are going to clip. So if you're going to work with rebuilding V's apartment, you're not starting from completely fresh somewhere else in the world, you probably want to find out where those memorabilia pieces are. I did not do that. And I've had, you know, again, I've had to do little fixes. I've had people, giving feedback, criticism of that. It's something I should have done from the start. So I encourage you to get a save file if you don't already have one that has the memorabilia and that has Nibbles the cat, because that's the biggest thing. And I totally get it. People love Nibbles. I love Nibbles. Frankly, I would have Nibbles, but in my original playthrough, I never figured out how to get him. And since I've come back to the game, I've just been modding. I don't even have the time, or I haven't been putting the time into playing the game. So I don't have Nibbles, and I don't know where he passed. I'm aware at this point from people sharing screenshots that his bowls, for example, go pretty much right here, right? So by having this floor just above the normal floor, it shouldn't really clip with those bowls, but it might clip with the bottom of the bowl. So that might look weird. Or if I were to place an object here, like my Corpo Netrunner build has a new cell phone vending machine that's much bigger, kind of comes out to like here. And so Nibbles bowls are just like gone, right? They're consumed by that item. And if Nibbles pass into there, you're going to see Nibbles either clipping into it or maybe, Nibbles wouldn't even be able to get inside, which could cause weirdness. So if you can, again, get the memorabilia, get Nibbles, get all that stuff in the apartment, and then kind of try to work around that. Because from, what I can tell, like people will still use the apartment swap if it screws up a little thing like that, but some people won't. And, it's just kind of nicer. So for myself personally, I've done my 9 life path variants. So going forward, I'm hoping to do 2.0 versions where I add new details to those and maybe try to fix them up to be a little bit more friendly. I probably can't do too much though, because the more cobbling you do, the harder it is, to make it really friendly. But going forward, I'm going to try to make at least one new build that has kind of my style, but is 100% friendly to Nibbles and to the memorabilia for people who are really down with that stuff. But yeah, that's just basically something to keep in mind. So going back to building, I'm going to suggest as a kind of an approach, how I tend to do it, once I have my concept, my theme and stuff like that, you can just kind of, you can look through the categories if you want to try to find key pieces. If you're newer to building, you probably won't be cobbling that much in the beginning. But that's kind of handy to do. But once you get that, my suggestion is to do the structural stuff first. I mean, this is just like real life. If you bought a new home and you're moving into that new home, if you're going to paint the walls, if you're going to, redo the floors, work the ceilings, maybe shave off that popcorn ceiling, you're going to want to do that stuff before you move all your furniture in, right? It just makes sense. And to me, the same goes here. So I would recommend when you start, do all the structural elements. So if you're going to replace the walls, like covering them up or whatever. Do the ceilings, do the floors. You don't have to do every room. I'll often leave the bedroom and the bathroom until last, and even the armory. I like to kind of set up the main room. This is the core space. And by grounding myself that way, by saying, okay, I've figured out what type of, colors and textures and stuff I want to use. What's my theme? Is it Street Kid? Is it, Thrash Street Kid? Is it Glam Street Kid? I can work with all that to figure that stuff out in this core room. And then once that's done, I just extend that to the outer areas, right? So I'm like, okay, I know what items I use. I use the air conditioners to do a lot of the, structural stuff in the walls here. So I'm just going to use those to potentially cover up in here and cover up in here. So I leave that stuff to later. Once you're done the structural elements, you can then move on to what I tend to focus on next are what I call feature pieces. So I'm just going to quickly... So we've got all this stuff laid out, right? We can see it's shaping up the corner. So remember, none of that is saved yet. So I want to save those props before I do anything like logging out of the game or even switching presets. If I go to a new preset, I just lost all those items, right? So I'm just going to save them. Be a little patient, give it a second. Don't like spam click it. If you repeatedly click it, I think it actually creates duplicates, because I've found duplicates of items that made no sense, and I think that's probably what it was. So now that that's all saved, okay, if we go into save props, we can see, oh look, there's all those items, right? Just gonna collapse that. So say I had worked on the project for like, an hour or something, and I was like, okay, I saved all that stuff, but I just want to make sure that that bug hasn't hit, right? And funny enough, the bug did hit me. So it's something that seems to happen more often with presets and stuff. It's definitely a difficult one. Like, the creator of AMM has worked on it to try to fix it, but it seems like it's a really tough one to fix. But yeah, you could tell the bug is active because, even though it's small, it's 1 KB, and it should be larger than that because I just added 6 items. And then when I open it, it's like, yeah, look, there's no items, right? This is where the props are listed between these brackets, and there's nothing there. So that bug is now active, unfortunately. So what we're going to do to recover from that, obviously we're still selected experimental apartment, which is fine. I'm going to click backup, like I was mentioning. Just want to make sure Vortex needs this 6K. Okay, so I'll go into backup here. And I think it's just was saving to the top one. So it's 419 right now. Okay, 418. So this is it, experimental apartment backup. And then this one is 4 KB, right? And we open it up. Yeah, so there we go. We can see the data for those props, right? So I'm just going to kind of copy that, come back here. And then you can see all the backup writing in here, right? This kind of junk. So, what I'm just going to do is delete that experimental apartment. There's already one there, but that's the corrupted one. It's kind of foobarred, right? I'm not sure if it'll work like while the thing's running, to tell you the truth. Yeah, I see it created a number 2. So anyway, now I've kind of got, a working version. But the thing is, once that bug is active, this is the real screwy part. If I were to switch to a new apartment, it would actually wipe that apartment as well. So once the bug is active, it's going to corrupt every single file that you load up in terms of apartments, apartment JSONs. So as soon as that bug's active, what you want to do is log out of the game. Make sure you do the backup first, because if you log out and you go back in, you can't use that backup command anymore because it's just going to load up the corrupted file, right? So I'm going to log out here. I'm going to delete the corrupted one. Get rid of that. And again, if I had been, copy pasting it before, I wouldn't have to do this backup thing. I could just grab the backed up one and just drop it right in, nice and simple, right? But the main thing is if you rename it without using the in-game rename function, so I just went to rename here, you have to actually open it up and you can see all that crud is still here. So you have to delete it from here as well so that it knows which one that it's actually pulling up. Save the file. And that'll always be at the end under name. So if there's a lot of props, you might have to scroll down to find that, but just look for that and make sure that this name is matching like the JSON is kind of the important part, I think. So let's just kind of jump back in. Make sure that's working okay. I have to bear with me for a minute. I will definitely teach myself how to edit these videos someday so I don't have these absolutely cruddy wasted time. So just loading in. And this is coming close to the end of the video. I think I've pretty much showed most of the key stuff. I just want to give a sense again for how I kind of approach filling out the build. And what to do basically once your thing is done and you want to share it with the world kind of thing. So skip through this. In terms of how long like a build takes for me, I'm just going to load up actually a brighter save. Here we go, daytime. I probably spend about 15 hours for each build. You could do it a lot faster than that. It really depends how much you experiment, how much cobbling you're doing, how much of a perfectionist you are, because oh my god, that can make life really bad if you're constantly redoing stuff. So if we jump into decor, everything seems fine. So there's our experimental files, so we can see it loaded up our cobbled corner and our cobbled table. So yeah, if you ever get that bug, there you go, right? You can either have the backup, copy pasted version of the JSON in which you just drop it right back into that user decor folder, or you can create the backup using the button click like I did, clean up the name, open it up and clean up the name inside, and everything's working fine. So what I wanted to show, yes. Oh, crap. I forgot. My bad. Damn it. Okay. I don't have the right file in to be showing you the Nomad builds. They actually require a different archive in Lua. So that's why that happened. This needs to go away. So just quickly jumping back in, I'll show you through the Corpo example. But effectively, what we're looking at is once you're done, the walls, the floors, the ceiling, all that main stuff that, you know, you kind of want to have finished, then I go into what I call feature pieces. So these are just like standout elements of the apartment build. Things that kind of draw the eye and that particularly really help give a sense of what is the theme of this build, right? So what I wanted to show in the overdrive build, that's my Nomad one. And I wanted it to be like a Nomad biker, basically, type thing, right? Like a motorcyclist type thing. And so I ended up finding a prop for a Yaiba, Japanese motorcycle. And I put that right at the front of the build, kind of once you first get in. I can actually show you 1 second. Quickly while that's showing, I forgot I can actually show you that here. So I'll go to my mods and we're looking at Nomad Overdrive. So as soon as you walk in, this bike right here, you can see the Yaiba. So that's a feature piece because that's instantly selling the idea of like, this is a biker's apartment, right? It's a Nomad apartment in that sense. The big petrochem gas pump that I decided to jam in there is another one that I would call a feature piece because again, it's supporting the theme. It's a fairly sizable object. And so what I like to do is get feature pieces, at least several of those in each build, right? To make it stand out. And I will often build around the feature piece because again, like in this case, you can see petrochem, it takes up a fair amount of space. So I tend to want to get those in earlier. That helps me immerse by giving me those thematic kind of objects that I can work around, right? So that I know, okay, I'm working with this kind of biker concept for this build. Or if I were to, jump over to glam, the Gamora sign, right? That idea of like indulgence, right? Of the whiff of sexualization that comes with that or whatever. That's the kind of funky thing that I wanted for glam to stand out a little more. This big neon piece is a feature piece as well. There's something about big pink neon to me that really sells the idea of glam that I was going for. The pachinko machine, another kind of feature piece, right? So anything like that, the corner, these three kind of crooked stacked TVs is kind of a feature piece. Not so much for glam, but I replicated that for all three Street Kid ones because I figured a little bit of sloppy media in a corner like that kind of feels Street Kid to me, right? So there's a whole bunch of different stuff you could do with that. I would say when I get into, Mystic, the masks are kind of feature pieces in themselves because they kind of sell that idea of like kind of traditional culture that ties into somewhat with mysticism. This kind of sun is a bit more of an aesthetic value, but it naturalizes the apartment, and that's what I wanted Mystic to kind of feel was a bit more natural. So it's one of the few ones that has greenery. I've got the big kind of yucca plant here. Even these kind of curtains they're kind of accents, but they're still kind of feature pieces because again, they add to the theme of mysticism, right? The skulls, the painted skulls, the Day of the Dead skulls were fantastic for that as well. So yeah, now that we're back in, so what I can do here, if I were to go into Corpo Tactical, I would say that the wall-mounted guns were kind of a feature piece. It's not one specific thing, but that's selling the theme. Same with, see in the corner, that kind of circuit board looking red, right? Which to me it makes that area pop a little bit. The circuitry adds to the kind of cyberpunky vibe basically, because I didn't want it to feel too contemporary modern in that sense. So I would consider that a feature piece. Same with the kind of scrolling, red stuff there. And just one note on that back circuit piece. Once again, I have to always be a big proponent of cobbling. Cobbling is so much fun. It's so awesome. That piece is nothing more than this microwave. There's not a lot of good lighting. Yeah, so see this circuit right here? This little chunk of circuitry? That's what's in that corner there, right? So all I did was just, as soon as I saw that bit, I was like, oh, I love that. I want circuitry in a build. That's a great thing if I size it up. Again, in Cyberpunk, really great that, the texture resolution still stays quite strong. So I can literally just tip that, come over here, sync it back, boom. So that's exactly how I created that. So that's what I mean when I say every piece, that you spawn into the world, pause for a minute, take a look at it, right? Take a look at the back of it. Oh, look at that. That's kind of interesting, like it kind of looks like an appliance type thing. But especially since we do have rescaling in this game, which is so good because a lot of building games don't include that for some reason. I don't know if Max from AMM was able to kind of, I'm assuming it was set up in default in the game, but basically, if I were to tilt it this way, it's not fitting in perfectly right now, but, because I'm kind of covering something pre-existing, but you get the idea. Right? Just by sizing it larger and tilting it and kind of burying it potentially into something else, it doesn't look like a microwave at all, right? It doesn't remotely resemble a microwave, but that could actually make like a neat little texture to go somewhere to make it custom and make it your own, and just give you a type of texture that maybe you don't have available from anything else, right? So like right there, boom, look, that's kind of neat, right? And so same thing, like you can see I cobbled that piece in, and then what I did was just grabbed a bunch of sockets, right? So a lot of this stuff in, I think, game design are referred to as greebles, and they're basically just objects that can be kind of tacked onto other objects to give them a sense of like tactile, like surface variation. So it's not just flat and plain anymore. It looks like it's a little more dynamic, a little more interesting to the eye, but it also adds function, So my suggestion, you're always trying to balance function and aesthetic in a build. You don't want it to just be pretty most of the time. Some builds, yes, but if you can add function, what function does is it adds immersion. If something has a purpose, if it has a use to the human eye, we detect that. Now all of a sudden that has purpose, it feels real. So when you're cobbling things, if you can find little ways to add function to them, now all of a sudden that's not just an aesthetic object, it feels real and it's more grounded basically. So that could be merging it into the side like that. This is a sticker that I tacked onto it as well. There's a bunch of stickers I unlocked. This is a router, so it's thematically appropriate that this is like kind of a TV center that I'm trying to techify this a bit by putting a router there. It's lending to that lie, right? It's making it seem more immersive basically. So yeah, cobbling, super fun. Totally recommend it. So basically, yeah, once you get those kind of core stuff, right? You can see I cobbled all sorts of stuff here into the walls basically, really freshened up the walls. Another thing just to show for this one. Yes. So this kind of triangle shaped piece that's taking up a large amount of the wall is actually this piece here. Supersized it up, right? And then for these like bars, kind of almost metal looking bars, and this is again, and you can see how multi-use these objects can be. So this is that same piece I used in that corner that you can see over there, except when you turn it around, oh, look at that, right? There's something completely unique going on in the back of that. Oh, that's just fun. And then I realized, well, I want it to be, squared off, right? That wall is square. It needs to be squared off. So instead of just having the crooked, sink it in this way, scale it up a little bit. It's not quite flush. You can always test it by kind of dropping it to the edge that way, and then sinking it down. So now it's kind of covering that, you know, so you don't want to go too low. But there you go. That's how I built that showpiece, right? And then I just replicated it on this side to give it some consistency. You know, features built into walls and stuff like that, structural features, you know, depending on the build, tend to be a little nicer if you can make it feel consistent, you know, as part of the apartment. And I wanted this whole back area to flow well. So I decided, okay, I'll just replicate that piece there, and that makes it feel more realistic, right? In that sense. So anyway, distracting myself with cobbling, get the structural elements done is my suggestion. Move on to features, core features, figure out what those features are going to be, how they're going to bring your theme out. This would be another feature. It is cobbled. So I used a weapons vending machine, and I just turned it, and I used the side. And then I grabbed, I think it was computer unit, turned it on the side, signed it up, used that as kind of a capping piece, took a monitor screen and jammed it on the front here, grabbed the keyboard and jammed it on the base, stuck a sticker and a socket at the bottom. Boom. Custom object done, basically. So get those features, and then I progress to what I call medium detail. And that's effectively where I'm starting to place furniture. So couches, chairs, sizable objects that are going to take room. You do want to kind of be aware of where they are. But also really important for this phase for me is surface furniture in particular. So tables like that one, like this one. This is an air conditioner, but it has a top surface that objects can go on top of. We've got the desk over here. We've got this kind of like medic area. So in medium, I'm doing furniture and I'm doing those surface props. And then once medium's done, so I found a healthy balance of there's a fair bit of clutter that's feeling good. The room is still pretty open. The player can easily move through it, right? We want them to be able to progress without running around too much, basically, because people don't like wasting time and dodging objects in their homes. Once that's all done, I move into basically the final building phase, which is fine detail. And that's where I'm taking smaller objects like the size down mech, the cyberware containers, the cell phone glasses, all those little things, you know, the handcuffs over here. We got the suitcase open here, this size down helmet. And, you know, then you're placing those on the surfaces you've created, right? And that's why fine detailing last is typically I find best, because, you know, you don't have to worry about shifting other stuff around, and you have a lot of opportunity places for that fine detail to be put down. And once that's done, you're basically kind of good to go. You know, you'll want to do a polish phase. So typically this is good advice, I think, for any artistic endeavor. I like to write as well. I'm sure artists do this, is once your project, you think, okay, it's feeling good. I think it's pretty much done in essence. You know, the basics are done. What you want to do is step away from it. This is what I do. I step away from it for at least a couple of days. You want to kind of cleanse your mind. You know, it's almost like when you're eating a fancy meal, maybe, you know, they call it cleansing the palate, you know, to get rid of the taste of one food so that the kind of next food, you kind of appreciate it more. And that's what I do here is step away from a few days. And then when I come back, I'm going to notice problems more. Oh, you know what? I really don't like the placement of that couch. Doesn't feel right. You're giving yourself a bit of, you know, cognitive distance, you know, to step away from it basically and be able to assess it with a clearer mind when you come back. So you'll spot problems more. You'll say, you know what? Maybe I experimented. I used too many colors. You know, I've got like 4 or 5 strong colors. It's clashing. You know, I don't like that. I'm going to strip away 2 of these colors and I'm just going to stick to 2 or 3, right? So all sorts of little things like that. Maybe some of your small detailing, you know, oh, the desk is too cluttered. I don't like that anymore. I'm going to peel some stuff away. So I suggest doing that. Polish phase would also include fixing, clipping, and stuff like that. So you just have to keep an eye for it. And then for building in this game in particular, dealing with collision. So not all objects have collision. Collision just being like, if I walk into this couch, right, it stops me. Like I'm jumping up a bit because of this curved piece on the back, but it stops me. Same with this, it stops me. So those have collision. Some things do not. So for example, I think this cabinet didn't have collision. It's a custom cobble I did. So when I would walk into it, my character would actually pass like directly in. So what I ended up doing, What you can do is just type in collision, and you can see Max from AMM has marked a bunch of items as with collision. So a pretty handy one, for example, for floors. So when I put this floor down, the character originally would sink into it. If I look down, like my feet and my legs would sink through it because the floor type I used didn't have collision. So I would type collision, and I use floor Arasaka stone. So it's this piece right here. And then basically all I would do was, oops, oh, I just pushed myself right through there. Oh God, did I trap myself? Whew. So I just pumped that over there. Size it up a little bit maybe, and just sink it in, right? Till it's just under that floor. And then that created collision. So then I could walk over it and I wouldn't sink into the floor anymore. So that's a pretty handy piece for doing collision on big stuff like that. You can also use it if someone's clipping into a wall like this. Someone told me about this. I didn't realize, right? So I can clip right through that wall because there's no collision. You can see all this garbage that I've hidden back there, right? So for this particular one, I have to be careful because I don't want, let me see, stone. So this is the right kind of size and shape of piece. I'm going to move it up. Oops. So I'm going to go 90 on that, tilt it up, and then I have to turn it because I kind of want the flat side showing. And we make it flush. So that looks pretty good. So now I got to drop it down because if I leave it up like this, obviously it's going to stick out, which I don't want. I mean, I could bury it back here, but then you might clip through the front. So I'm just going to kind of bring it up to here. And I'm going to save position. So current position. I'm going to drop it down. And then I have to push it back a bit because I don't want it hiding this, right? And now, aha! Fixed. So now you're hitting that collision area. So someone could still jump and potentially maybe worm their way in, but doesn't look like that's likely or easy to do. So there you go. I just fixed that collision error. For smaller objects, because here's part of the issue with creating collision like that. If I bring out that same floor stone. So you can look at the size of it right now. I'm colliding on the edge, right? If I shrink this object, down, I'm still hitting the same edge. I'm trying to walk in, I'm hitting collision, right? And that's because it maintains the same original collision. The collision does not scale with the size of the object. So this is not a good choice for creating collision for smaller things. You know, it might work for this one, but what I actually ended up doing, I think it was, no. I think it was actually this one. No, that was not it either. So it was this one. Sorry, bear with me a sec. Yes. Okay. So this drawer has collision. And it's nice and small. So to fix this one, I just dropped that drawer right behind it, and that created collision. Right? There's also, I couldn't find it last night for some reason, but there's it's either a record album or a magazine, something small like that. And one of them, most of them don't have collision, but one of them does. And I ended up using that one in a couple of my builds for things even like chairs. I had a chair that didn't have collision and the drawer was just too bulky. Anyway, so you can search and find that. And then once you've got that small item with collision, that's all you have to do is just insert it into the other items. And basically you're good on that. And yeah, so that was polishing. So once it's you know, you've got it polished, it's feeling perfect. You're like, okay, I'm ready to release this if you're going to share it with anyone. Basically what you want to do, obviously, just make sure, you know, that your preset is fine. Everything is saved, you know, the bug isn't there or whatever, the corruption bug. So in this case, one way to check that, you know, I've got an ongoing thing is I can literally just come here. So I'm in the tactical apartment right now. It's 162 KB, right? So if the bug were active, it would be 1 KB. So I know it's not active. Basically, I'm kind of like safe to log out. I will usually copy, paste, and back up my apartment no matter what when I'm logging out. So it's not like you have to do that every time. But so basically, you know, you'd quit game or whatever. I guess I'll just do that now. And so all you have to do to share is quite simple, really, is take the JSON file for the apartment. So like say that's our experimental one here. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to make a duplicate on my desktop and just keep the other one in there in case I need to, you know, polish it further if people report, you know, problems or whatever. Go to Nexus. Obviously you have to set up a Nexus account and all that stuff. Click upload a mod. And then you just got to guide through, you know, it's an appearance based one. You know, I use the apartment category for these ones, the name, the language, blah, 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 description. In terms of this, you can actually, if you want, I don't mind. Oops. I'll just quickly show you. You can go to what I want. So I've got like an install, you know, quick install instructions, you know, long install, you know, that kind of stuff, compatibility, quick notes, troubleshooting if people have issues. Like you can, you know, maybe not word for word, but you can copy the basics of this stuff if you need to, you know, to just help people out with install instructions. Like I could care basically if you copied all this or whatever. Couldn't care less about that. But anyway, so yeah, upload the mod, basically get all your core description details, all that stuff I just showed you in here. And then once you get to media would be your pictures and stuff. Documentation is where you would upload the file, right? And for that, you're going to need to archive it. Most people, I think, use zip these days. I am an old person. I use RAR basically because I'm lazy and it's free. And they keep telling me that I need to basically get the purchase version, and yet they don't actually stop me from using the one I have, so I still use it. Anyway, create the archive, however you do it, and then you just upload the archive file. And that's the great thing is all the person needs to run the apartment that you created is this JSON file, that core one that has all the data in. And then they just grab it and they stick it in the appropriate folder. And that's basically it. So I think that pretty much covers the tutorial. I had myself a little thing here. Yeah, I think that basically covers everything. So hopefully I've given you a good sense of what you can do with building in this game. Again, the idea of cobbling, look at those items. They all have multiple uses. Get used to using resizing and stuff like that. There is plenty of objects that you don't have to do that. There's plenty of wall option, floor option, and all the rest. It just makes it that much more spicy. And it shows you that, you know, from my builds that basically, you know, how much you can do with it really at the end of the day. You know, especially for structural work, I find, you know, for my street kit apartments, for the walls, you know, like see it's kind of like black, almost could be like ceramic tiling or whatever. So I use that for like various elements of this place. And that's just, it's an item called the hidden server. And it's actually a fairly small, like computer box sized item that I just sized up. And it's really cool because it's got like different features to it. So you can kind of see like the red lights, you know, this kind of like metal plating stuff or whatever. And that makes it just really multi-use basically. So you can find different ways, like even the ceiling pieces, these chunks, those are just hidden servers sized up, right? And then I sunk a light inside of it. So tons of stuff you could do. Lots of fun. I hope this video was helpful. And, you know, I've been considering maybe streaming or something or recording some of my builds. But again, they're like 15 hours plus long. I don't think anyone's going to have the patience to actually watch me construct one of these from scratch. Anyway, that's it. Hope you have a lot of fun building. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot them inside the comment section and have a good one.